see it?
Whoa.
Oh my goodness. Oh, you'll be ready to go soon after all the time. Okay, thank you so much. Okay. So,
so drink some water and calm down, and then we're all ready.
Deep breath.
Okay, everyone else, put your things on mute, maybe.
Okay, thank you, Matu, and everyone. Okay. Okay, well, the reason I'm going to talk about this, the history of Indian food in the United States, is because this is a topic that really has not been explored. There's been several books on the history of Chinese food in the US and Canada. This is something people are interested in. But Indian food is another matter. I've thought of, I got into this because at one point I was thinking I should do a book on it, but it really would, it's such a massive project. I mean, it would involve going really a lot of travel, a lot of, looking at archives, because a lot of stuff isn't on the internet. So I just really put together, this is kind of a basic summary that I'm doing. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk a little bit about the early days of the United States up until the American Revolution, and then look at the 19th century when there was a lot of stuff going on. And then I'll get into the 20th century and I'll look at Indian restaurants today, and I'll look at some of the interesting characters, and I'll talk a little bit about Indian food in Chicago. So it's kind of a very quick survey, but it is kind of unique in the sense that this is really, people haven't done this. Now, people forget that for nearly 200 years, the United States and India were sister colonies in the British Empire. So there was a lot of going back and forth with the mother country, between the two sisters, between the sisters with each other. So America was really much a part of this whole British Empire. And what is very interesting is that the very first Indians, I have to explain the use of this term, Madhu will understand this, because until 1947, I mean, India really kind of applied to the whole subcontinent, what is today Pakistan, Bangladesh, and so on. It's hard to find a word. People say South Asia, that leads to confusion, the subcontinent. Here I'm using India until 1947 to mean the whole works, okay? And what's now India, Pakistan, all. So when I have to distinguish between native, I'll call our Indians Native Americans. So what's interesting is the very first Indians came to United States 10 years after the founding of the Jamestown colony. So they were really very original settlers. Now, why is this? Why did they come? Well, I've talked about the relationship with the mother country, and what happened was the American authorities would give 50 acres of land to anyone who could come who had at least one servant or laborer. Now, what happened in India, where the East India Company, which was founded New Year's Day, 1600, they were really one of the first multinationals. They traded all over the world, but they were based in India, and people made incredible fortunes there. They did not necessarily do it by the most benign means, but these people who became very wealthy were known as nawabs, which is a term for a local ruler. And so what happened is they made their pile and they went back to India. And you'll see this picture in the lower right. This is a scene from Vanity Fair. And if you remember Vanity Fair, Joss Sedley, he was one of these nabobs. He was the collector of, I've forgotten, Bulibag or something. And Becky Sharp really had her sights on him because he was so rich. And they had this famous dinner party where they fed her chilies, and she, ate them because she wanted to hook Mr. Joss Sedley. So he was one of these people who went back to England, and having made his fortune. Now, some of these people stayed in England, but others went to America. They went to America. Now, they had with them, they brought from India with them their servants. So they took these people with them to America, especially to Virginia, because when they were there, the more people they brought with them, the more land they could get. And so these people already were fluent in English, so they came with these rich people from England, from India via England. Still others arrived as slaves, and there were Indian slaves. They were traded, especially by the Dutch. This is something the Dutch don't like to talk about very much, but they had quite an active slave trade. And you can see there's a little ad here, a little notice about an East Indian who had run away, and they were looking for them, and they describe him. He had a very sly look and a remarkable set of fine white teeth. So this was the other component there. And on the left is just a picture, probably from England, of one of these domestic servants in a wealthy household. Now, when these East Indians, as they were called, came, they intermarried with the local Native Americans. And especially at one point in Chesapeake Bay, there were more of these people of South Asian descent than there were Native Americans. And there was a lot of intermarriage, and eventually this population disappeared. I don't know if anyone's done any genetic analysis, but it would be interesting to see if it did survive. Now, to go back to England, some of these Nawabs settled in England, especially around London, and they missed the food that they had had at home. So they started having ready-made curry powder, ready-made pickles. And the first Indian restaurant in London was by this very interesting guy called Sake Din Muhammad. He had served in the Indian army. He married an Irish woman, and he opened this restaurant called the Hindustani Coffee House in 1813. In 1810, actually, and it was in Mayfair. And you can see today there's a plaque there marking the site where this historic restaurant was. And he served curries. The coffee houses in London also served curries. And so there was quite a interest in Indian food. And of course, Queen Victoria herself was very famous for that. She had Indian servants, she had Indian cook, and every day in the palace, a curry was served. Whether guests ate it or not, I'm not sure. This restaurant only lasted a few years, but there was a great interest in Indian food in England at that time. And what happened is that, just go back, curry recipes started to appear in the cookbooks of the day, in Hannah Glass's famous Art of Cookery in 1786, and all the other cookbooks that followed had these recipes. Now, why this is important for the United States, there were no copyright laws. These cookbooks were all pirated. So when we come to the United States, we'll see that these recipes were duplicated there. Just a little side note about, I don't know how you pronounce his first name. Maybe someone could help me. Oh, in any case, Mr. Yale, who founded Yale College, he actually was a bigwig in the East India Company. He was head of the station at Madras. He made his fortune there, not necessarily by honest means. He had a business on the side, which a lot of these East India companies do. He was also, I think, a slave trader. But he did donate, he did endow Yale College. How did he do this? It's very interesting. It wasn't with money. He gave them bolts of textiles. And these very fine textiles, which came from India, were extremely valuable and very highly valued. So if you go online, you can find what he gave to do it. And whatever it was enough to found this college. And so in America, even before the American Revolution, there was a great rage for Indian things, just as there was in England. And people were importing these very fine muslins, tea, and spices. And and we have to remember that one reason for the American Revolution was that the East India Company was given them, they started losing money by that time. So they were given a monopoly over the tea exports, which really annoyed the local merchants. So that kind of precipitated the whole revolution. But actually, eventually they lost their monopoly, not just over tea, but over spices and things like that. When this happened, spices became much more affordable for the middle class, as did textiles, and there was a lot more interest in and availability of ingredients to make Indian foods. And what happened was a lot of these, as I mentioned, they were pirated. So here's some of the cookbooks that were written in the 19th century. They had curry recipes, mulligatawny soup, and all that, and these came from England. Now, this is kind of an interesting picture. This is the Indian Wharf at Boston Harbor, which was built to handle all these imports from India in the early 19th century. And in one day, nearly 80 ships from Calcutta alone unloaded their cargoes here. And chicken curry, curry veal, lobster curry, they became standard items of fare in the Boston taverns. Now, while Americans were importing these hot spices from India, the Americans were shipping large quantities of ice to India. And this is a very interesting story. And somebody found a method of, they would cut the ice from the ponds and rivers in New England, put them in specially, I guess not refrigerated, but cold holds. So when the ships came, they could go back with these cargoes of ice, and they became all the rage in the main cities. And every major city had an ice house. You can see Calcutta, Madras, and Mumbai. And now it's a site of an institute. I gave a talk there in January. It's the site of the Parsi Institute there. And these are beautiful structures that received American ice. And there's a wonderful quote by Thoreau. He said, these New England transcendentalists were very enamored with Indian philosophy. And he said that the sweltering inhabitants of Madras and Bombay and Calcutta drink at my well, and the pure Walden water is mingled with the sacred water of the Ganges. And in 1868, Walt Whitman wrote a passage to India, which was a metaphor for the journey of his soul to God. That gave the title to Forster's novel. And there was just a great rage for everything Indian in Boston. And the minister of Trinity Church commented that a larger part of Boston prefers to consider itself Buddhist rather than Christian. So that was kind of something we don't know about. Now, one of the most popular curries is this country captain chicken. And this was created in Charleston in the mid-19th century. And it's basically a mild chicken stew. It's made with brown chicken pieces, onions, and ready-made curry powder. And it's served with almonds and raisins, and it's served over a bed of of white rice. The story is that there was one of these captains who came, British captains who landed there, and he was so graciously entertained by the city's hostesses that he gave them the recipe for this dish, and it was named after him. He was I don't know what country his country captain. This dish became a great favorite of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because he used to go south for his treatments. He introduced it to General Patton, and Patton liked it so much that he made it part of the Army's ready-to-eat field rations in 2000. And here you can see one of these MREs, menu number 4, Country Captain Chicken. And even today, it's always been on the menus of all the big Southern chefs. Paul Prudhomme, Émile Lagasse, Paul Ledeen, everybody has this Country Captain Chicken, which is just kind of a chicken curry that has this kind of interesting story. Now, because I'm in Chicago, I have to mention that a major milestone came in 1893 when Swami Vivekananda gave his famous talk at what is now the Art Institute. And this was the world's largest interfaith gathering at the time. And this is actually a photograph that was taken by Harrison Studios, and I think it was eventually colorized. So I don't know if it had any influence on the food. If it did, I'd very much like to find that. But it is certainly another milestone in the relationships between India and US. But the number of Indians in America actually remained very small. And in 1900 census, it said only about over 2,000 people of Indian origin were in the United States. And these probably, now I don't know how realistic this number is, but this probably included students, religious leaders, maybe some artists and people like that. But then 2 other groups came, which were really interesting. And the first are what are called Hindu Mexicans. And between 1900 and 1910, more than 3,000 farm workers, mainly Sikhs from the Punjab, but some Muslims, some Hindus, came from Canada. They were kind of driven out into the Imperial Valley of California. They were very successful farmers, as you know, Punjab is still the breadbasket of India. And they settled down there and began farming. Now, a wave of xenophobia then swept over America, nothing new. And in 1911, a government committee deemed South Asians the least desirable race of immigrants thus far admitted to the United States. I think they'd already excluded the Chinese. And in 1917, there was the Asiatic Barred Zone was created, which had strong miscegenation laws. And it also included everyone in Asia from coming to America as an immigrant. So what happened, these Indians were there in the Imperial Valley. They weren't even supposed to own land, but they married local Mexican women who were allowed to own land. And there were, and so this kind of hybrid community was created. And it was, there were about 400 couples in all. And you can see this is one, Antonia Alvarez and Rulia Singh in 1917 on their wedding day. And they created kind of a hybrid cuisine, and their center was in Yuba City. And this was a well-known restaurant called El Ranchero. And you can see it says Mexican and East Indian food. And they would have dishes like the Mexican, like chicken and lamb curries, curry vegetables. And their main crossover dish was a roti quesadilla, which had melted cheese, onions, and shredded beef inside a paratha, which is an Indian lightly sauteed bread, and served with a curry chicken dipping sauce and with a side. The restaurant operated for 40 years. It closed down in 1994. And now the community's almost disappeared because everyone is intermarried. But it was a very interesting and fairly, there's a whole book being written on this community because it's quite intriguing. Now, the other interesting community is this Bengali community. And another group of immigrants who came, and these were probably illegal aliens, I don't think they came legally, were Bengali Muslim peddlers who traveled. They were based in the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans, and they went around selling silks and other exotic goods around the country. They were traveling peddlers. And many of them there married local African-American women. Another much larger group of Bengalis were seamen, these Lascars, who jumped ship. And I should have said, even in the early days of the history of America, there was this, they were treated very badly. They were kind of, I forgot what the word is, not hijacked, when you take someone and force them to be a sailor. So they would jump ship, especially in New York City. And they also settled there, and they tend to intermarry with Puerto Rican and American women, and African American, and they settled in Harlem. And here they opened butcher shops, and they also opened little restaurants. Now, these restaurants became meeting places for the local Indian community. And another interesting little side story is that a lot of revolutionaries who fled India actually came to America, especially on the East Coast and the West Coast. I think at Berkeley, there was a real cell there. Some came via Canada, they came to escape arrest. So these places also became meeting places for these revolutionaries. So they opened these restaurants around Harlem. And when I was at Columbia University in the late 1960s, there were still a few of these restaurants there. I remember my husband and I went to one of them, and they were run by these Bengalis, and I can't remember the menu, but it was still a very interesting thing to go there. Another kind of exodus took place as part of the so-called Great Migration. Some of these Indians moved north with the African Americans, and they moved to northern cities like Detroit and Chicago and Baltimore, where there were jobs, and they lived in boarding houses, again, mainly in the African American communities. And I don't know much about Chicago, but this is an interesting little thing. This is from the early 1950s. It's 1321 South Michigan, and it was a jazz club run by this Colonel Abdullah, who I'll talk about later. It was called the Taj Mahal, and it had Indian food, curries, costume East Indian staff, and they had jazz. And this was Ahmad Jamal, who was a musician. So I think even in Chicago, there must have been some of this exodus here, although I haven't documented it yet. Now, this is again another little side story, but it's very interesting because this guy is, I think, the first bad boy chef. Before Bobby Flay, before Gordon Ramsay, before all these guys, he was one of a kind. His name was Ranji Smile. It's not a real, I think he invented it. And he came to New York in 1893. He was recruited by Louis Sherry, who was a big restaurateur, because he'd seen him serve curries in London, and he wanted to introduce curries to New York City. So this guy was a great showman and a great PR guy, and the reporters loved him. The New York Times was always featuring him. Harper's Bazaar did a great feature on him, where I got this picture, and they called him King of the Curry Chefs. And Harper's Bazaar said he became an overnight sensation by initiating the fashionable set of New York into the mysteries and delights of East Indian cooking. And he was a great fantasist. He claimed he was the son of the Emir of Afghanistan, which didn't exist, that he was good friends of King George, who gave him a watch. He had all these fantasies. I mean, it's just, but he got a lot of publicity. But he also had and he also went around giving interviews about how badly Americans ate. They should eat like Indians. It would be much healthier. And so he was quite an interesting character. But the downside was it kind of went to his head. He became, he had developed a drinking problem. He would get in brawls. He was always being arrested. And he married a succession of ever younger and younger women. I don't even know if he divorced the first ones. I think there were 4 wives on record. And eventually he was resorted to giving cooking demonstrations. He was fired from here, cooking demos in department stores. And then eventually he left India with his last wife, and no more is heard of him. And I don't know if he had much impact on yes, he probably did have some influence on the New York scene, because in New York, there were, in fact, quite a few Indian restaurants in the 1910s and 1920s. And this is one of them, the Taj Mahal Indian restaurant. It's kind of interesting. Madhu will appreciate this. It was started by a Bengali dancer who kind of, one of these people who somehow came and stayed. And he did have some Bengali dishes on it. It's also interesting that he has famous curry dishes, but he calls them salons, and that's salons. And that's not a word you hear very much. It's an old word for a curry. You still find it in Hyderabad today. And he had quite a few mithai sweets. He had rasgola and firni, and he had some special dinners. And one was a Calcutta Cup dinner, which was $3.25, and the other was the Raja special dinner for $5. And that would be about $35 and $55 in today. So you can see this was a pretty upscale places. And it was on West 42nd Street. And there were several of these restaurants in New York at that time. I don't think there was anything in Chicago then. So in 1946, to return to immigration laws, they allowed South Asians to become naturalized citizens, but at a very slow rate. But there were still these discriminatory national origin quotas. And so in 1960, there were really only about 12,000 recorded people of Indian origin in the country. Now I have to talk a little bit about restaurants in India, because that will tell me what's going on here. India really did not have a restaurant culture in the way we understand it. A restaurant meaning a place with a set menu. You could order off the menu, very nice surroundings, waiters, and all of that. People until the 50s, if you wanted to go to a restaurant, you'd go to a hotel and you'd have continental cuisine. And then there were a lot of smaller places that served that would serve South Indian food, but they weren't restaurants in the sense that you would let me take you out to a nice restaurant for dinner. This changed in the 1950s after independence and after partition. And what happened, there was a lot of people came, especially from the Punjab, to Delhi. And because these people didn't have jobs, so they eventually opened restaurants. One of the founders of this thing was a guy named Kundan Lal Gujral, who was always thought to be the inventor of tandoori chicken. He was a great showman. I interviewed him just before he died. He had a big mustache and a fez. He had kind of taken a tandoor is a clay oven. He had the first tandoor made in Delhi. He had this secret recipe for marinating the chicken. And he started having kind of a roadside stand. But then eventually he opened a restaurant called Moti Mahal, which was really one of the first restaurants serving Indian food in a nice environment. It became very fashionable. Nehru, Prime Minister Gandhi used to take her guests there, the president, and so he really made a splash. Now in the Indian food history world, this has been challenged. There's a big debate going on. They say that it wasn't he that invented it. It's another Kundan Lal who worked for him. And there's now, there's 2 chains of restaurants in India. There's the Moti Mahal chain, which is owned by his grandson, who was a little boy when I interviewed his grandfather. And then there's another chain whose name I've forgotten. I can remember it. That purports to come from this other lineage, this other tandoori chicken lineage. But that's kind of irrelevant. But so these people, other people eventually came and opened restaurants, and their menus became a hodgepodge of dishes. And they had kind of their basic Punjabi food, which was things like based on peas and cauliflower, carrots and greens. They would serve chicken, they would serve goats. These are some of the typical dishes: palak paneer, aloo gobi. They would serve chapatis, a simple bread. And then when they wanted to go a bit more upscale, they started doing these richer dishes, these meat dishes in a gravy, things like Rogan Josh, korma, biryani, which is rice and meat. And they call these dishes Moglai. Now, this is totally a misnomer. This is one of my big bugaboos, because if you go to this wonderful Google thing that lets you chart, there was no use of the term Moglai food until about 1950. This term is totally a creation of restaurateurs to give their food some status and to, and actually, it does have kind of a meaning. I think it kind of comes to mean more Muslim food, but nobody really wants to say that. So they call Moglai, and it has kind of these, refers to this certain kind of food cooking, but they also invent these silly dishes with names like biryani Shah Jahan and a chicken, Noor, things like that. So it's really things. Now, the reason I mention this is that this is the kind of restaurant, kind of food that eventually came to America. When people opened restaurants here, this was the kind of food they served, because they really didn't have any other model. And one of the restaurants here is Gaylord. And Gaylord was opened actually in 1946 by two guys named Iqbal Ghai and Pishoy Lai Lamba. And it became kind of a model for Indian restaurants. And they had branches all over. They did have a branch in Chicago on Clark Street. It closed, and there is a Gaylord's here, but it has no connection with the original Gaylord's. It's just, they just use the name. So as I said, when Indian restaurants came here, this is the food they modeled. And here's a couple. And the other model that became very popular is the South Indian vegetarian restaurant, which did have more of a tradition. I think in the 1920s or 30s, the Woodlands restaurant did open, and this serves South Indian vegetarian food like sambar, dal, idli, and sambar, I mean idli, dosa, things like that. Now, I have to go back to the immigration situation. So 1965 saw a big reform of American immigration laws, and this was inspired by the civil rights movement. The discriminatory national origin quotas were abolished, and now the new legislation prohibited discrimination on the basis of race, place of birth, or anything like that. And there was a new system. It was based on professional status and family reunification. Before, it favored certain regions, especially Europe. So, so in the years that followed, 40,000 Indians started entering the U.S. every year, and I think the number's probably gone up now. And they would settle in places like Chicago, New York, Houston, mainly big cities. And there you had shopping, grocery stores and restaurants would open to serve them. And of course, in Chicago, this was Devon Avenue, which became the center, not just for Chicago, but for the Midwest. And there were like 150 stores at one point in this place. The Patel brothers was the first. They opened a little store on Devon near Damon. I remember we used to go there. They basically opened it for their wives to do something while they worked. And now they have like over 50 stores. They have entire malls. They're worth, I know they're worth a lot of money. And it's interesting that Mr. Moffat and Tulsi still work in their store. That's very interesting. And now they're actually, this Patel Brothers is undergoing a renovation, so they're going to be even spiffier. They now have a mall I think it's in Schaumburg. There's a whole Indian mall there now. Devon Avenue is really being hurt because, well, both because of COVID and because people don't need to come from Michigan to shop here, because now there's Indian grocery stores all over the place. still, I'd like to say that Indian food still remained outside the comfort zone of many Americans. And what really helped put it in the map was Madhur Jaffrey. And in 1973, her book, An Invitation to Indian Cooking, here it is, was published. She's a very charming woman. She's an actress. You still see her on TV and shows. And she knew James Beard, and she knew Craig Claiborne. And she really had a great editor in Judith Jones. So this book really became a bestseller. She was on TV, especially in the UK. And in her book, she really covered a range of India. She told people how to make it. She told people where to get the ingredients. So this really empowered people to try to make Indian food at home. And another person was Julia Sani, who also wrote a best-selling book, Classic Indian Cooking. And then in 1987, this very popular book, The Art of Indian Vegetarian Cooking. Well, now let me go to so most Indian restaurants, as I said, really follow this model. There are a few exceptions. You do have in Chicago what you call dhabas, and these are places where taxi drivers hang out. They have a menu on a blackboard. And they're usually kind of good. There's some in Devon we go to, Hyderabad House. The food's pretty good. It's reasonably cheap. It's meat-based. These places, many of the taxi drivers are Muslim, so often these places have a little prayer room attached. And when things open up, if anyone wants to go to one with my husband and me, we'll be happy to take you, because you might feel uncomfortable going by yourself, but they're great places. So to bring us up to the present time, in 1990, we had another change, and that was the increase in the number of work-based visas and the temporary skilled worker categories. And these were the famous H-1B visas. And in 2014, Indians received 70% of the 300,000 or so that were issued in that year. And another large group were the students from India, who are the second largest international group after China. So this also influenced Indian food here. And it led to the creation of what I call the progressive global Indian restaurant. And if you go to India now, to a big city, the food is so different from what you'll find here. You have chefs like in Mumbai, you have that have trained at Noma in Copenhagen, have trained at that, what's the name? The very famous Spanish restaurant. My memory's going. You have chefs from, huh?
Bully.
Yes. And so you have a lot of interaction. You have chefs that go to the Culinary Institute of America and train, and at places like India Accent in Delhi, that now has a branch in New York. Mask in Mask, they have a dinner just like a linea. It's like a fixed price, that's it. 10 courses, which is what the chef prepares. It's really packed. They have great cocktails. They have wine pairing, beautiful, sophisticated lighting. I mean, just like you would have at a linea here, or other places like that. So, and it used to be that beer was the standard accompaniment to Indian food, but now, and I personally think the best accompaniment to an Indian meal is a cocktail, a beautifully matched cocktail. Nothing can beat it, because wine it's very dicey to pair it. I mean, people try to do it, but I think it's kind of tricky. So this is really a new trend in Indian food. It's not fusion cuisine. Fusion just kind of implies mixing A and B and sticking them together. It's very sophisticated plating. And these are from dishes from Roo. Roo is a restaurant that has a branch in Delhi, and has a branch in San Francisco. The chef trained at Noma. He was there for 2 years. And you can see that this is a beef short rib curry. And it's served with kind of a little version of a Yorkshire pudding, very delicate, elegant serving. A green pea and goat cheese kulcha, which is a very interesting combination, a paneer pinwheel. And so this is really a new trend. I should add that this has existed in England for probably 20 years. There have been upscale Michelin-starred restaurants in London especially, but I think that's because, first of all, British know where India is. They know a lot about it. It's kind of part of their DNA. And also, it's near the city. People have a lot of money, and they'll spend 100, 150 pounds on an Indian meal. And this brings us to the question that my friend Dr. Krish Ray of NYU, not NYU City, I think New School, NYU has studied. He's looked into this, why Indian food hasn't really taken off in the US, why people are not willing to spend $100, $150, $200 on Indian food, which they'll spend on Japanese food, which they'll spend on Italian food, they'll spend not so much in French food anymore, that's kind of dying. And even Chinese food now has become, people have become more discriminatory, they know the different styles. And he's analyzed it, he's looked at the data, and it's really, it's just really, there's many reasons. I mean, I think many of the Indian restaurants until recently were operated by guys who are businessmen. They own a sari shop, they open a restaurant, they hire any old, I hope there's no restaurant owners here. I mean, they shouldn't be saying all this, but they're not really interested in the food. This is changing, as I said. There's a lack of historic ties. And then there's the sheer vastness of Indian cuisine. I mean, what is Indian food? Talking about Indian food is like talking about European food. You don't say, let's go out and have European food tonight. What does that mean? I mean, Italian, Hungarian. I mean, Indian food is so incredibly diverse. There's almost, you can say I really would say there's no dish that is common to every cuisine in India. And that's a strong statement. But I mean, in parts of India in the Northeast, they have their own cuisine, sticky rice, there's parts of India. I mean, it's just so diverse. On top of the ethnic diversity, you have 7 religions. Every religion has its own, and sects within the religion, they have their own food habits, their own habits, their own beliefs. So this complicates it too. And I have friends say to me, well, let's go to an Indian restaurant. What should we, I don't even know what to say. I don't know. I mean, now we take them to Rue. I'm not the PR agent for them. There's a new Indian restaurant open just on the end of December called Basant, which means spring. And they have an interesting menu. They have a couple of Kashmiri dishes, which is a really great, which you don't find typically. They have it's a small menu, but they're trying to do something different. The question is, will Indians accept this? Will Indians want to have their their paneer pinwheel? Or will American, I don't know. It's a very difficult thing. And the Indian government talks about doing culinary tourism. And I've said this in public in India, that nobody is going to want to go to India to eat tandoori chicken and saag paneer until the level of restaurants in this country is more tempting. And the Thai government, the Malaysian government, they're great promoters of culinary tourism. And so this is one of the questions that has to be solved. So that's kind of my very quick run through Indian food in America. And if you have any questions, I have a question slide. Okay, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much for listening. And I hope I didn't go through too quickly, but I've already wasted enough time. So
thank you, Colleen. That was lovely. Should we switch off?
Unmute.
Yeah, unmute. And do you want Colleen to switch off the PowerPoint so that we can all see each other?
Yeah.
Great.
I think that might be a good idea. So if you just stop sharing, Colleen.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Perfect.
Okay.
Great.
That was marvelous.
Oh, you're too nice. Thank you.
And the images, I'm salivating.
Yeah.
I know, it's making me hungry, even though I did have a Devon lunch today. So,
But I remember having that paneer pinwheel with Madhu.
Yes, exactly. And Rue has been doing so well through the through the holidays. I mean, they have done an incredible lot of business. All right, questions, guys, thoughts, comments.
Colleen, I just wanted to mention that I grew up in New York, and I remember going to this, I think it was one of the only operating Indian restaurants, I think it was on 110th Street by Columbia. And it was spectacular. And it was, I remember going there, I was a teenager, and it was memorable. And to such an extent that a few years later, I bought Mrs. Balabir Singh's Indian cookbook.
Good for you. That is the best Indian cookbook ever.
Great. It's great. It's terrific. Yeah. Oh, good. Someone else knows it. Great. So I really appreciated this. This is great.
Great.
No, that's a great book. I recommend it to people because she, she was every housewife in Delhi at one point went to Mrs. Balbir Singh's cooking school.
It's
And
great.
her her daughter-in-law's issued a new version of that book. I haven't seen it, but I'm so glad you like it.
Oh, it's really terrific. And then I spent a lot of time in Calcutta, and so really enamored of the food in Bengal. So.
Which in the old days was not easy to get to know. It's only very, very recently that Bengali food is now available in very kind of basic restaurants in Calcutta, because Bengalis prefer to keep their cuisine to themselves at home.
No, that's true. And this fellow opened this chain, O Calcutta, and very nice, elegant. Now all over India, anyone can have Bengali food, and
I think they've gone international as well.
Really?
Yeah. But actually, to me, it's still not authentic.
No.
It's to have real Bengali food. There are these lovely new restaurants in Calcutta that do authentic Bengali food. But again, I find that it's they're again tending to have a certain recipes, which is like what we would serve publicly. But again, in Bengal itself, there are many different types of cuisines and 4 different communities. None of that, of course, is represented in this.
No, I mean, what you say is true, let alone Indian food. Gujarati food you could write a whole book on Gujarati or Bengali food. It's just so diverse. It's that's part of the
Gujaratis, which of course are the majority population here amongst the Indians. They will not eat each other's regional food. So the Surtis, the people from Surat, think of their food as being the best, and they will look down their noses at food from Saurashtra or wherever, So it is so complicated that we tend to kind of simplify everything and think of this as one cuisine when it's really not.
What I've always loved in India, since my favorite guide over years and years, I love the dabas. And, so many Americans would go, ew, what is that? And it's fabulous food.
And it's fresh food because they cook for such volume, particularly in Punjab. The dhaba food off the roadside is absolutely delicious. It is made with some of the best ingredients, the best milk, the best ghee, and it's unbelievable. It's so rich but so fabulous.
Well, some of the other great food in India is the street food.
Oh, yes.
And even many Indians won't eat it. They're very afraid. But, if you see it being made in front of you, if it's hot, you're okay. It's only if it's sitting there. I mean, I've eaten so much street food in India without any problems, but you just have to be careful. And obviously, if a guy's, if you see a lot of people there, it's good, because if his customers got sick, nobody would go there. And that's another great part of Indian cuisine. Now what happens is these upscale restaurants are incorporating these like bhel puri into their menu, like for $10. And some, people go say, $10 in India would be 20 cents. Why am I paying this? So
I loved your presentation, the context you put all of India in. That history was fascinating. This was one of the most charming presentations I've seen. I was floored.
Thank you.
Yeah. I know I've been trying to tell even the Consul General and others that you've got to have Colleen speak, because people think they know food, but they know nothing about Indian food. And especially Indians are the worst of the lot. So I really want Colleen to be, invited to speak at different gatherings so that she can, she's got all these books, but, it's, I guess there's a whole new generation into food now. So
there really is. There really are people who are writing serious things about food in India, and not just recipes. And my grandmother made this, and these grandmother recipes are getting to me after a while. But no, people are really discovering that this is true. And And it's good. And people need to know the languages. People who can go into the archives and find things from the 18th century.
That's
It's
what's
so
interesting.
important to do that.
Well, I met this amazing guy in Tamil Nadu who's got his own like food research and travels. And oh my God, I mean, talk about Tamil food. Every time he researches, I don't know whether you know him, Rakesh Raghunathan. Colleen, oh my God, he just does the most amazing blogs and vlogs on his travels, and works with different temples on their food, works with hotels and restaurants, and also does food tours. And it is just amazing. And he just specializes on a small segment and goes like really deep into that segment, looking at texts, looking at different traditions, different communities. And that's the way you have to really research it, because each community has their own traditions based on religion.
Thanks so much for this. I'll see if I can find, I'd like to contact him about something.
Yeah, I'll give you his contact, and he has, he's on Facebook. He does films. For a while, he was being shown on ZTV internationally. But he does these food tours of Tamil Nadu, working all across Tamil Nadu, but just specializing on that.
I have a question.
Yes.
Chicago, who does a really good dosa?
I don't know. They all kind of, I just know.
Yeah, actually the difficulty is sambar more than dosa. They can make the dosa, but they can't do the sambar well.
Yeah. There's that place, that guy, it was called the Dosa Guy or something, that he opened he had
Art of Dosa, this new place.
Where is it?
But not so good.
Not so good. Okay.
No.
Sambar is very difficult to make,
Sambar
I tried to make one the other day, and I couldn't believe it. I had about 4 pots, It looks like a simple dish, but it's not.
Actually, it's easier, Shoma, to make idlis and varas and dosas, because actually that's not that difficult, and you can get the batter now delivered fresh. There are all these companies now that just sell you the batter. It's the sambar which is the trick, and that all of them get wrong.
In what way do they get it wrong?
It's like mulligatawny. They think they know how to make it. Then they put a lot of powder, and basically they just kill the taste. It's got to be hot, pungent.
Okay.
It's very difficult to explain, but there's something about a good sambar. Like the first thing I'll eat once I arrive in India is a good sambar. Mm-hmm. And that's when I realized that all the sambar here is really bad.
It has to hit the right places on the tongue.
The right spice.
Yes, that's true.
And the right amount of pepper, I guess, because it's rasam, but it's much more powerful than rasam. So it's like the original mulligatawny, which now, of course, is hard to get in most places.
Yeah.
Our daughter-in-law is South Indian, and she'd been living us for the last 5 months. Oh. And so we have been eating remarkable food, including the samba that her mother gave her that she brought here. So I think we just finished the last batch.
So then you understand what I mean about great sambar.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we do is we freeze it. Because when you get good sambar, you just freeze it and just reuse it very scarcely. Just add a little water and a little bit more touch of spice, because it's very hard to get really good sambar.
Sorry, Colleen, what did you tell me? Khejuri? That's an Indian, British version of an Indian something. Is that right?
Yeah, khichdi. Yeah, khichdi is basically rice and dal.
Isn't it?
Yeah, the British adopted that, and they, made it their own for breakfast. They had hard-boiled eggs. They had, was it kippers or fish? Some kind of fish.
White fish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also kippers.
Also kippers. Yeah. The British khejuri is very different from our khichdi. And also our khichdi doesn't have one recipe. Each region of India has its own khichdi. So,
I think if anything approaches a national dish, it's khichdi. I mean, it's not eaten everywhere, but it's something that almost everywhere, everybody has their version of, because it's combines
comfort food.
Yeah.
So
in an era which is looking to develop more nationalism, for better or worse, but in India, how important might it be to develop a national cuisine? No.
Well, they tried that a few years ago. There was an attempt to create a national dish. One of the government, I know the guy who was running the agency, and it didn't work because there was a lot of dissension, and people said this, and they just gave up the whole idea finally. So there is, I mean, there's kind of I guess I don't know if there's a national cuisine. In a way, there's so much stuff on TV now, so many cooking shows, that people are getting much more aware of other regions' cuisines. And in a sense, this is creating kind of more of a national thing, you know, like people are making, Bengalis are trying to make South Indian food and so on. So it's perhaps this is bringing the country together more, but I don't think there'll ever be a single.
Well, I mean, the United States certainly had strongly regional cuisines.
Yes.
And the food that you got in New Orleans was entirely different from that which you got in New England or the Pacific Northwest or anything. And yet none of those foods, I think, are foods that outsiders would call American food. I mean, outsiders tend to think of American food as being fast food and hamburgers.
Yes.
And
Hot
pizza.
dogs, yeah, pizza, yeah.
But
That's our contribution to the world.
But it's also it's a kind of, you know, identity. It's a kind of mark of identity that you eat the same foods. And it's interesting that you bring up television and cooking shows. It used to be that you looked for improved transportation and roads, because that was how people got when it, you know, it used to cost in this country in the 18th century, actually later than that, it cost less to ship things across the Atlantic than 30 miles inland, because there just weren't any roads. And as we got roads and things, we began eating everybody else's food. So but in a sense, what you're saying is that television shows and cooking are, you know, making that process faster. You don't have to build the road. You just have to show an appealing chef cooking it on television, and maybe people will eat it. I don't know. Is that happening?
Yeah.
Well, certainly India food was not only regional, not only local, it was probably village based. I mean, there's a proverb that, you know, if you go to the next village 20 miles away, the language changes, and even the food would change because everything was very local, locally grown. I mean, when my husband grew up in Delhi, fish was a rarity. I mean, you know, Bengalis couldn't get their fish. And so food was extremely local. In fact, what Madhu said about the dhabas, that's probably true. That food is probably from the local farmers giving them the tomatoes and stuff. So it's very local food. So now with, you know, improved transportation, people can eat whatever they like. And, you know, in Delhi, you find asparagus, and now people have goat. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know. I suppose it's a good thing, but
But, you know, I find that in more recent years, there's much more of a trend back to both regional and seasonal food, which is this kind of importance of food suddenly in Indian society. So the television has acted as a great medium, but it's also made people want to go back to their cuisines. And so you're getting local foods. People are kind of, the organic movements are happening. People are kind of talking about, you know, farm to fork. I mean, all the things that they had, then they gave it up for the McDonald's, and now they, you know, they suddenly realize that actually that's the way. And if you see some of the blogs and vlogs and the social media in India, if you just follow any of these food either programs or bloggers, you will see such enormous interest in food amongst younger people.
Yes, yes.
It's actually, I mean, and I've been watching a lot of, I think I said to some of you, I've been watching a lot of food programs on Amazon, on Netflix, etc. And the variety of Indian cuisine suddenly is really, really, you know, out there to be seen. And then that again gets back on TV, because many of these people then become, like celebrity chefs or whatever, or they win a program. And there's a huge sea change in the way Indians look at their own food.
And that's very true. And another thing is the elevation of the status of the chef. I mean, in that movie Monsoon Wedding, you remember the little son watches these cooking shows, and he wants to go be a chef, and his father gets really mad. No, you have to be an engineer. Well, now I've visited some of these culinary schools in India. They're incredible. I mean, they're probably really expensive to go. And they have like Western kitchens, they have Chinese kitchens, they have big chefs come and teach there. And it's just a real, I'm not going to say a racket, but it's almost getting there like here, because you pay all this money, and really what kind of job can you get, especially now in COVID? But certainly it's no longer considered, you're not a servant anymore, you're a chef because of these guys on TV. And in movies, you have the big movies.
And if you hear this Indian chef who's now become really renowned, who's based in New York, Vikas Khanna, and you hear his childhood and about how he got into food, you really get this picture that Colleen is talking about, where it was really the people who were not considered good for anything who could go into cooking. But
Yes.
now it's become this profession that people are aspiring to.
Yes.
And anybody can be, which is amazing.
But you know what? If you talk to some of the restaurant owners here, or I've talked to some of the managers of the restaurants on Devon, and they say, I don't know if this is true or not, but they say it's just impossible to bring really good chefs into Chicago. It's prohibitively expensive for some reason. They can't seem to do it. And the restaurants are really relying on the quality of the chef as to how good the restaurant is. And, we're sadly behind with our Indian restaurants here in Chicago. I'm always—
Well, not just in Chicago. I think we're even behind in New York.
Well,
I don't think the Indian food scene in New York is that hot compared to London. It's like 20 years behind.
If you go to some of the little places, I found an amazing place the last time.
The little places are much more exciting. And the food trucks, the whole food truck stuff is so much more creative, Colleen, because that's where you're really seeing innovativeness with young Indians, whether they've grown up here or in India, like really doing interesting stuff. I mean, it's like Jasmine, Barbara, but it's like many, many, many Jasmines in New York and California and stuff. Very popular amongst very young people who can't afford the big restaurants, but they can do a truck.
Yeah. One of the best Indian restaurants anywhere or non-India was in Tel Aviv. And
I love that one.
I'm trying to remember.
That's one of my favorite places ever.
Right. And she
right
started
on the water, right?
Huh?
Right on the water, right? Is that the one?
No. It started off downtown Dizengoff, moved out to what was it? Beautiful restaurant. Physically, I loved the food, and she used to bring in very fine chefs, and it was among the best Indian food I ever had outside India.
Really?
Well, I'm remembering one that was gorgeous, and I used to go there every time I go to Tel Aviv. It was so beautiful and really some of the best Indian food I've ever had.
I want to add in New York on 56, there's a place called Accent India.
Indian accent.
Yeah. Indian accent. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is, to me, we had a chance to talk to the owners the last time we were there. They are artists.
Yes.
They are.
And
but that's, as Colleen was saying, this is the new breed of restaurateurs.
Yeah. They were just
fabulous.
It's so worth a trip. Every time, we're there, we try to get in. It's hard to get in, but oh my God, is it worth it?
Well, you should go to Rue here when it opens. I mean, when it reopens, it's comparable, I think.
I've been to Rue's once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't think so?
I no, but I think I've idealized the New York experience because I was so not expecting it.
Yeah.
The kids were so charming and they were so open to talking about their food. And I had just finished a course on Ayurvedic cooking with
Oh.
Dr. Adiga here in Flossmoor that I was blown away. I mean, they were just so, they just knew everything about the food, the balance, everything, preparation, everything. It was just amazing. So
What's
I think Rose is also very good. I don't mean to, minimize that at all. It was just, I was probably more, I've idealized my experience in New York.
What's fascinating, I just looked up Indian restaurants in Tel Aviv,
Uh-huh.
and I haven't eaten at an Indian restaurant in Tel Aviv in years. They've got the 10 best, which means there are even more. But I'm not finding my original wonderful restaurant. And because there weren't Indian restaurants when I got there, I used to have to make my own paneer, which was a fun experience.
You know who makes a very good paneer in Chicago?
Who?
Penelope Steiner.
Yes.
She makes it at home. I couldn't believe it. She told me, and then I do this, and I imagine my mother
She's
doing
even
like,
got the right cloths. She's
Her
actually
inventions
got
of
the
over.
right
Yeah.
muslin cloth for the
She cooks it at home perfectly. Penelope Steiner. I was like, you're joking. And it's
No,
really
it's very
good.
good.
I have
Mine was pretty damn good.
It's not
Okay,
difficult to make paneer.
I'm a great eater. In India, I have a quick question, Colleen. I'm really curious. I have never eaten it, that there's Japanese food in India. As a Bengali, what on earth do they do with the fish in sushi? Do they Indianize it?
No, they it's just
No,
like
no.
regular old sushi. I mean, here.
Is it good there?
It's okay.
There's everything in India. I mean, they like everything that comes to the West you find in the cities anyways. Yeah.
So they don't put cumin and stuff in it, right?
No, I don't think so. It's just like,
No,
yeah.
that's only with Indian Chinese, and that is a different story. I think all the food that is coming now, the international food that's coming now to India, it's very much, I mean, and in many cases, the chefs are Japanese. I mean, the sushi
Yes,
chefs who are
yes.
coming to India are all Japanese. So just like the Italian chefs are coming, in our Delhi house, we had these chefs, for one of the big hotels staying. They're all importing the topmost names for that cuisine. So that's very different from the Indian Chinese that grew, developed in Calcutta back in the day. That was very different. That was for the Indian population in a different time. So we all got used to our chili chicken.
Yeah.
Was what we thought of as of Chinese food. It really wasn't until relatively recently that Chinese food transcended that. And I came across a statistic, which I'm sure you know, Colleen, that there are more Chinese restaurants even now in this country than the sum of fast food restaurants.
Really? No, I didn't. That's amazing.
Just extraordinary. But really, every tiny town has but it's not Chinese food. Two things. One is, Amato, you said that Penelope Steiner had the right something or other to make
the muslin cloth.
The what?
Oh yeah,
the muslin cloth for to make the
paneer, the cheese.
To make the paneer. It's called a cheesecloth, but it's got to be a cheesecloth with a certain amount of holes in it, so that the whey comes out of it in a particular way, and then you put it under a weight to get the whey completely out.
The other thing is that I read, you trip across things, but that COVID is changing some of the scene in India. And one of the ways it's changing the scene is that guys who wouldn't have been caught dead cooking are having to cook or starve because their cook are not coming.
Yes,
at all. And so they have to shop and they have to cook for themselves. And I guess they call mother to find out how to do it. But this was an Indian newspaper article. It's a big deal, and if that persists, that will be a major sociological shift.
Well, it's kind of, if you like, guys who dictated because they didn't use typewriters, and then they became fluent in digital.
Sure.
But still, I think amongst the chefs, they are mainly male. I mean, there are very few women who have really, are written about in the way. I mean, there was this one girl who won one of these shows, and so she's got her own setup now. But still, they
But
don't
who's
call
the
her.
gal in Thailand, Madhu, that we all watched? You gave us a link.
Oh, yeah.
That was what I was just thinking of too. I think I just saw a woman chef.
I'm just trying to remember.
It was Harvard. It was the Harvard series had it. Yeah.
Right. But the thing is that, there's this MasterChef winner who has her own establishment now, but many of the women just are not as well known.
Well, that's true in the West too, though. There's not that many big women chefs, so I think it's running a kitchen is very hard, and
Yeah.
And there's one chef in Delhi, Megha Kohli, who I interviewed, and I mean, she's amazing, but she's not married. She lives with her family. They're very supportive. I mean, it's not the kind of thing you can combine family life, I think, with even here.
Hmm.
Here she is. Yeah, Garima Aurora.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
what's
She's the. Yeah.
So, Colleen, what is the answer to this business that Diane was saying about why it's so difficult to get to hire good Indian chefs in America and get their visas? I mean, you would imagine that they have a specialization. It should be quite simple.
No,
And
actually,
I think
it's not. Because I know when years ago, a friend of my husband's family's cook, who had worked in large places in the Middle East, wanted to come here. And I talked to Muffet Patel, and he said, well, yeah, I'll hire him if he can get a visa. Well, it turned out, I didn't realize this, if he'd gone to Calcutta, he could have got it easier because Muffet knew it, but he couldn't get a visa. I mean, it was just very difficult. And I just think maybe it'll change, but I think there's probably so many visas are given for that sort of thing. And I don't know if they're willing to pay the money either.
I think it's a money thing. Actually, I was going to say the same thing, because I see all these temples that are mushrooming, that they're paying for the priests to come. So how is it that they're able to afford to bring the priest who can, chant a few mantras, and they can't bring the chef? I think that's just a money issue and priorities.
They're not willing to pay probably what these guys want. Yeah, even in India now too.
We're talking about the restaurant owners rather than the people who are established with the temples. It's two different people.
No, exactly. So I think it's economics that the restaurant owners of Devon just don't want to pay those prices.
You know what? And they're not making huge amounts of money on Devon. And it's really very expensive to bring in one of these chefs.
But a Roo or an Indian accent are bringing in the chefs, and you see the difference.
There's a difference.
I wouldn't be.
They're also those restaurants are at a different level. I mean, what they charge has a different economic model than the restaurants on Devon.
Yeah,
right.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was also an immigration visa issue, in that that would be perceived as interchangeable with cook, and as a job that an American could hold, American citizen could hold, whereas the need for tech people is a sort of a different queue for coming in. But I wouldn't be, I mean, I don't know this.
No, but the category that I'm most amazed by is the priest category. Well, because there's something about Americans that they have been allowing priests of different sorts from different faiths to come. So that's a category that the Indians all exploit.
But that's not interchangeable. You can't have an evangelical pastor substitute in a Buddhist temple, So whereas the perception could be that a cook is a cook is a cook. I mean, this is not true, but and that could be done by anybody.
Of course, in this crazy country, I wouldn't say that. I don't want to be pejorative. religion
Yes, you do.
holds a very unique position, as the last 4 years has unfortunately illustrated in a way that is quite blatant. And what would be tolerated by or allowed in for religious practice may be in a unique position. I don't know, but we do know that this country is an extremely superficially religious place, which places a high value on ministers, whether they're priests or not, as long as they're not Muslim.
Actually, that's better for the Indian cooks, because the top Indian cooks in the Bengali homes, Brahmins, the cooks are all Brahmins. They could just come under that visa category. They're all religious cooks.
You know, but now even in India, it is really difficult. Many communities actually complain that they can't get the specialized
That's right.
Brahmin cooks. Because, it's really true, because, you know, certain foods are only to be cooked by them. And I think Colleen can talk much more about this. They are becoming a rarefied breed.
Well, to go back to Devon, if I could just say something, a lot of the people working there now are Mexicans anyways. I mean, I talked earlier about the convergence, and it really isn't that hard. You know, a chapati and a tortilla, I mean, and the spiciness. And I mean, I think that's what they're doing, and they probably come very inexpensive, very cheaply too.
Always surprised that there are no Mexican restaurants in India, or very, very few, certainly not in Calcutta.
Yeah, and Indians over here love Mexican food.
Yes, yes.
I discovered by chance that Indians love Taco Bell because they can have vegetarian in, you know, Mexican food that feels like Gujarati. So when you're like tired of your home cuisine, you can go to Taco Bell.
And Chipotle.
They should
And Chipotle.
revive El Ranchero here in Chicago. The Mexican restaurant from Yuba, California that you spoke about, Colleen. Maybe we could have a version of El Ranchero here in Chicago.
I think this group needs to start its own restaurant.
There aren't that many Mexican restaurants that I know of anywhere. You know, it's not one of the cuisines that has traveled in the same way that, say, Italian food has, or
Chinese food.
What is that? Was a line in an otherwise terrible movie with Walter Matthau. Now I will tell you the two great truths of life. Nobody ever does anything he doesn't want to do. And everybody likes Italian food. There aren't Mexican restaurants, and they're not real. And I don't know why. I don't know whether Mexicans don't travel to Germany or don't, you know, because that's usually what how restaurants start. Is they are something that you can do before you speak the language.
Mm-hmm.
Cook, you can get people to, it's one of the reasons they have such a high failure rate is, you know, people who can cook will start a restaurant and have no idea.
You're absolutely right.
What a tough business it is.
But are we talking Mexican or Tex-Mex? They're two different things.
I'm talking Mexican. I'm just saying that that you don't find, you know, whereas the Greeks went everywhere and started restaurants everywhere, and were willing not only to have Greek restaurants, but they owned something like 90% of the restaurants in the Loop at one point. They were all Greek, because now they were hot dogs and hamburgers, but they were Greek owned.
Yes.
It was a big deal.
Coffee shops. The coffee shops that were the million
New
things.
York too.
Yeah.
I remember going to a restaurant in the Lake Country in England, and one of the giveaways is that there is avgolemino soup on the menu. You know, everything else is not Greek at all, but there's Greek salad or there's avgolemino, and you know, you say, is this by any chance owned by? And it is in the middle of the Lake District. So.
Well, it's interesting how certain ethnic groups go into certain professions, like, you know, Koreans and Vietnamese and manicurists. And I mean, how does this come about? It's always fascinated me how maybe one or two people do it and it just kind of catches on. And you know,
Dunkin' Donuts. Indians own Dunkin' Donuts right and left.
Well, one of the best Indian Chinese meals I've ever had was in Tashkent with Madhu, because we were so utterly bored with the food we'd been having that we went. And I swear to God, it was the best Chinese ever because it wasn't ploch and it had a different taste. And it's just very interesting when your taste buds get saturated in a negative way by boring food, something that kind of ignites them is
but
a joy.
that was where we were laughing, and we were saying that, Colleen, going back to your thing about the Indian government, that if they had sent, or as part of cultural diplomacy with Central Asia, if they could send a few chefs who could teach the local chefs the use of spices, that would be amazingly successful in Central Asia, because it's the Mughal food without the India in it.
Exactly.
So it is so raw still in the meat category. So it's the mutton which is still smelling. So they haven't learned how to marinate it yet. The tandooriization of it hasn't really happened, even though the tandoor is coming from there and producing the bread. So, and remember, Barbara, that was where we saw that they were doing these huge mango festivals. And that is something they should really think of doing in America. Because, instead of trying to do food, they should just bring a product and just try to kind of do a festival around that product.
Well, if you want a whole season of mangoes, you can sign up online for.
I know, but that's too many mangoes that they send you.
Well, you can do a smaller group of them, but you can taste over a 3-month period everything from the Alfonso to the little guys, and it's fun. I overdid it one year. I was giving my mangoes.
No, you overdid something?
So what is it, Barbara?
Mangoes, I'll look it up. He's about to get in touch again.
Yeah, well, hello, you've got friends you can distribute.
Right.
Of course.
Barbara, please send the
I'm
link.
addicted to mango.
I'm going to.
To all of us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe there is, and I don't know about it. But for a while, obviously pre-COVID, there are things like a Turkish market downtown, down in front of.
Oh, I love the Turkish market.
There, and there's the German Christmas market, and there was something else. I know that there are a couple of Greek festivals around the city where, if you're curious, you can go and try things. I don't know, is there an Indian one, and why not?
At Tali's wedding at the Four Seasons, we walk in and it's Turkish Fest. At the Four Seasons, I don't know why, but they practically lost me rather than going up to help her get dressed. So we take the dress up, whatever, and I come down at the appropriate time, and there are 4 dervishes, and 2 of Tali's friends had accompanied me. And they went back up to report to Tali that I was really entertaining the idea of getting the dervishes up to her suite and I was thinking about it, but there was great pottery. I bought everybody a lot of pottery, and I love Turkish Fest. No for just dervishes.
Colleen, you really blew my mind at the beginning, talking about the history of India and Indians coming to this country. I just had
no idea.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I was shocked when I discovered
a whole
it.
new world. I'm blown away by it.
That's called a survey.
When I first started traveling to India in the 70s, a lot of, even the big cities, the restaurants were much more limited in the 70s. I mean, And even smaller places, there might have been a quality
remember that.
restaurant, and there might have been maybe a little later, I started noticing that there were Chinese restaurants, but I was eating a lot of street food along the way, and it was very, very spicy. I was just crying and eating it, but it was so delicious. And every night I would just pray, please let me have the discrimination not to do that again tomorrow. I would go and do it the next day again. It was so delicious. And it went for months like this, just my stomach being torn to pieces, but I didn't care. And I just so enjoyed just being with the people who made these wonderful little foods and stuffed them in the newspaper. Sometimes they just hand it to you in a newspaper cone. When I lived in Kashmir, there was a woman who came with my houseboat who would make me an omelet every morning that had chilies in it. I dream of this omelet. Sometimes, and she made it with such love. And she would come in sometimes and she'd just watch me eating it. I was so enraptured every morning, just this explosion of taste. But you know, when I think back on all of these foods and my enjoyment of it, I remember the faces of these people who made it for me. And even when I go over to India Garden now, you know, the chefs, there's a big window. And if you're taking the food, as you're taking the food at lunchtime buffet, I see the man who is making this food for me. And we have a wonderful exchange. He's such a jolly man. Do you know this guy? Do you ever go to India Gardens?
No, and I live about 3 blocks away from it, so.
Oh, it's quite good. And you know what? They really have gotten better and better and better and better through the years, particularly the lunch. I think.
Is that on Ontario?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it wasn't very good the few times, and it was years ago.
Striving for better and better and better.
I think Gaylord has become quite good in recent
It
years.
did. It went through. When did it get good again?
It has become quite good.
Which one?
Gaylord, the one on
I love Gaylord.
yeah, Rush or whatever it is.
It used to be fabulous, and then it became disgusting. When did it become?
I think, I don't know whether it's the same family. Colleen would know better, but I mean, it's owned by a Gujarati family, right? And it's I met the owners, and I guess they take more interest or whatever it is, but honestly, the food is very good.
You know,
It's much better. You all use Vajra. Actually, Gaylord is so much better than Vajra.
Yeah, I didn't love Vajra so much.
I'm telling you, Vajra, I don't know why all of you in downtown use Vajra. Vajra really is not very good. Gaylord
You know what happened? There's a story there. The guy who started it, he hired a cook, and the cook developed cancer, and he died. And so they didn't have a cook. So the owner had to kind of scrounge up who he had, because we went there. It was awful. I mean, it was genuinely bad, and they served the wrong drinks and everything. So I think they've had, I don't know if that was about a few months ago. Maybe it's improved.
No, it hasn't. Vajra certainly hasn't improved.
Okay, well, that's the reason.
Yeah, Vajra, I think it's a very downtown thing that they all think it's very good, but actually Gaylord is so much better than Vajra downtown. I mean, I still like Vermilion, to be honest. I mean, they've got their old favorites, and you know.
Yeah.
Actually, Madhu, it's interesting that you brought that up, because I was thinking, with all the conversation of specific cuisines within India, we've spoken very little today about fusion, which is, I don't think of as an Indian thing except Vermilion, and Indo-Chinese. And maybe, Colleen, you can talk about that. It's not really a phenomenon that's very widespread, fusion, is it?
It's kind of passe now. People don't use it much anymore. I know Vermilion. I remember when she started it, and I would say, you don't need to do this artificial Indian. Why don't you just do Goan food? That is what it is. You know, it's a genuine combination of Indian and Portuguese food. And I've never quite understood the business model of
I
Vermilion.
think maybe it was the marketing, right?
Marketing.
It was a pretension.
Yeah.
Hmm. But you know, we're talking about the success of restaurants, and honestly, marketing and PR are so important. And it's really sad what somebody, you know, somebody said that a person knows how to cook, they open a restaurant, but they don't know. I mean, these restaurants, they have mailing lists, they're after you, they're always getting in touch with you. I mean, it's really a business, and they're on good terms with the press. And it's really sad that people put a lot of money and hopes into a restaurant, and they don't realize that they have to, however good the food is, without this, it's not going to succeed.
Well, and there used to be a restaurant called the Milk Pail out in the suburbs. And it was the kind of restaurant, it was an American restaurant. It was the kind of restaurant that families would go to after church on Sundays, you know, every Sunday. And when my husband was in business school, one of his classmates was the son of that family. And he talked about how difficult, I mean, that was an extremely successful restaurant. He said they had to do all their own linen because the linen service was run by the mafia. You have a problem with cash in a bar. What's to keep the bartender from just pocketing the money from it? I mean, there was one, he also said, you can have someone come there for 20 years after church, and one day a server's having a bad day or the cook is having a bad day, and they never come back again. So it was very interesting to hear this, you know, scion of a very successful restaurant talk about what a difficult business it is. And I think when people are immigrants and they start restaurants because that's all they can think of, that's not what I meant to say, but that seems to be a good path to get them, you know, putting food on their tables with it. They don't realize all the problems that it takes to solve to run a great restaurant, a successful restaurant.
On that note, years ago, my husband used to say, when they find Hitler alive in Argentina, they should bring him back and force him to open a restaurant in Chicago. That would be fitting punishment.
It's better punishment, right?
Based on exactly what Penelope was just outlining, dealing with the mafia, dealing with the guy with his hand in the till, dealing with the cook who doesn't show up, and so on and so forth. Thank you. Thank you, Colleen. This has been a wonderful afternoon. I have to sign off, but this has been so enlightening and wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you for taking part. Sorry for the delay.
This was marvelous, Colleen. I'm going to send out it's mangoes. I found the address, so I'll send that to you.
Thank you so much.
And this really was wonderful. I assume, Colleen, you want mangoes.com?
What is that?
The mango delivery service.
Oh, I love mangoes. Yeah. But,
okay.
Madhu, I somehow don't have the name of that woman you were talking about who developed the takeout business.
Amuse-bouche.
Is that it?
Oh, Jasmine.
Could you send me her information or her?
Yeah, it's on Instagram. Just I'll text it to you.
Thank you.
Amuse-bouche, and you have to follow her on Instagram to get her. And she sends out a link
out within 20 minutes.
Yeah. Did you get the Indian Jewish?
No, I was too late.
Ah, that went in 24 hours.
24
She just did Indian Jewish this weekend.
But what did that consist of? What did she do?
Indian Jewish, Baghdadi Jewish food.
Do you have any specific dishes?
Sorry, I didn't take it, but because I was dreaming of aloo parathas. I have this thing about cravings, and when I have a craving, I have to eat that. So I don't know if I still have kept the email or not, but it was a very extensive Jewish menu. But she might do it again because she was sold out.
Yeah,
I just have not heard of that particular cuisine.
Oh yeah, it's what my Auntie Roz used to make. It's really Indian Jewish food from Bombay and Calcutta and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a little Ashkenazi with a touch of kebabs and whatever. But it's got some very, very unusual things also.
So it's
I
Ashkenazi.
would imagine, yeah.
It's Ashkenazi, so it's not the food of Indian Jews.
It is the food of Indian Jews. I'm saying that the influences in it are, because many of them, were Ashkenazis who came to, I mean, the Indian Jews.
Mostly they were Sephardic, I thought.
No, that's a mixed, it depends where they went.
Okay.
Yeah, it varies because groups went to different places. So it's a question of where they went.
But there have been Jews in India
from 50s, from the time of
2,500 years.
Ashkenazi would be relatively late.
Yeah. So we're talking about 19th century, 20th century food.
So those were the Baghdadis, but there were the original that came after the destruction of the
temple. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But that is more Kerala and stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I was invited for Shabbat when I was in Bombay one time, and I actually had one of those
meals.
And it's really, you would think it was an Indian lunch, but yet there were all kinds of Shabbat things. I mean,
so my Auntie Roz would put on this table even in London. So their food never changed whether they went to Israel, Australia, America, or London. Because that's the food that they all grew up eating and their children grew up eating. So it overtly looks Indian. But actually in the taste and they have a touch of like a cumin and things. Yeah. But actually when you look at the food, it's Jewish.
Yeah.
Madhu, do you know Flower Silliman's cookbook?
Yes.
So this is Jewish Indian food.
Yes, and she was from our school. So I mean, our school, for some reason, because a lot of old Jewish families kind of went to our school. They, for some reason, I think it's more the alumni have helped promote that book a lot.
Excuse me, but what book was that, please?
This is a Jewish cookery book from India.
Is that what it's called?
No. Sorry, I have to send it.
I can send it to you.
Okay, great.
I'll send the link to you.
Yeah.
You know me.
Yeah.
It's.
Is there a good role place?
No. I use Bombay wraps, but really you can't compare it to Nizam's.
It's not good.
It's not. No, actually, this Bombay wraps is better than Kati's, but it's not. You can't compare it to Nizam's.
Tallest Hobbit. It's still not good.
It's still not good. Yeah.
You've got to go, guys. Have a lovely week.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Good week.
Love you all, Colleen.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Colleen.
you.
I'm so sorry you were so stressed, but I hope it all went off really well. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was
Bye,
great.
all.
Thank you so much
Bye.
for
Thank
inviting me.
you.
Bye. And thanks for your help.
And clearly, when COVID is over, we all need to get together and eat a meal on wherever you suggest.
Barbara,
Good idea.
paneer, right, Barbara?
What?
You're gonna make paneer?
Oh no, that was desperate. I had to reconstitute the milk with yogurt because Israeli milk was so thin. You couldn't get curds and whey. So I'd add the yogurt and then throw in the lemon. And it was very good for what it was, but it was improv.
Well, we will have Colleen help us, take us to Devon.
Yeah.
Have a food.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Bye,
Thank
all.
you.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.